STA 3624 Time Series Analysis and Forecasting. Lesson 1, Introduction to Time Series Analysis. Time series analysis means that collection of some observations over time to the purpose of make the data compressions or explanatory purpose or signal processing or for the predictions. So in statistics, time series is a record of values of a variate, that means a quantity, during a particular period taken at successive intervals of time. It means the time series analysis we are collecting some information related to one quantity over a time for the predictions or some statistical purposes. And also a graph of time series is called a histogram of that time series. This is different than the meaning of histogram. We are normally we are talking about the statistics. It means normally for the histograms, if we take some class intervals and likewise we are drawing the histograms, this is called histograms in statistics. But in the time series, histogram means any graph we are plotted over time, we call that as a histogram. As an example, if we take some quantity over time, that is a graph of a time series. It can be like this way, right? That is a histogram. If another graph quantity over time it's come like this way, that is also a histogram. That histogram means graph of a time series, right? Graph of a time is called histogram of that time series. We have to plot a graph over time, right? Then it's named as a histogram of the time series. That is different than the histogram you learned earlier. That is, so understood what is the meaning of a histogram. Histogram means a graph over a time in a time series. A time series is a collection of observation made sequentially through a time. That is a time series. That is collection of observation made sequentially over time, and the graph, when we are drawing a graph, we call that as a histogram. Then if we are taking this data, as always there are two types of time series sales, a continuous time series and the discrete time series. Continuous time series means the time series is said to be continuous when the observations made continuously through time over some time interval. It means if you take a time series with time that is continuously like this way, continuously, there are no breaking points, it is continuously going, that means that is a continuous time series. Then another one, that is another type, that discrete time series. A time series is said to be discrete when observations are taken only the specific time which are equally spaced. It means if we are taking a time series, so 1 2 3 4, so it means we are taking at these points only, we are taking observation in this point. In here each and every time we are taking the observation. So here this is a discrete one, because these intervals we are not taking the observations. In here continuously taken. So if we are continuously taking the observation, that is continuous time series. If we take the observations in the specific time periods, that is a discrete time series. Then univariate time series, set of values over time of a single quantity. If we take only a single quantity, for here only one quantity, that is a univariate. If we take change the value in order several quantities, it means if we are taking that is time, so there are several quantities like this way. Here there are two quantities, 1 and 2, so that is multivariate time series, right? Okay, then you have to remember continuous time series, discrete time series, univariate time series and the multivariate time series. Then uses of time series models. Obtain an understanding of underlying forces and structures that produce the observed data. That is one purpose. Then next one is find a model and proceed the forecasting, monitoring or even feedback for feed forward for the control. And also time series analysis help to provide compact description of data, separation or filtering the noise from the signals, and prediction of the future values, and testing hypothesis and predicting one series from the observation of others. These are the uses of the time series. Then examples for the time series analysis. Then there are some examples given: population analysis, daily rainfall or the temperature, stock market data analysis, daily temperature, foreign currency exchange, monthly sales analysis. There are some few examples for the time series analysis. And the forecasting, there are two then if you take this topic of this course, that is time series analysis and the forecasting. Now we discussed about the part of that is actually introduction for the time series. Then now we are going to discuss the what is the meaning of the forecasting. Forecasting is the process of making statements about the events whose actual outcomes have not been observed. It means we are going to predict what will happen in the future based on the observations taken in the present and the past. So there are, in the forecasting, there are four major steps we have to follow. First one, analyze the data, then identify the patterns, then develop a model, and pattern is extrapolated to future to make forecasting. So we have to analyze the data, then we have to identify the patterns. There are actually there are major four patterns we have to identify. I will describe later. Then we have to develop a model, and using that model we have to extrapolate that model to make the future forecasting. So that is the way of doing the forecasting. And here these are the here that over time we are taking some patterns, then this is extrapolate. Then up to here we are measuring, this is for the future, then this is the prediction. It means forecasting part is done in there. We are by considering the previous patterns. If you are taking, now I told you, no, here identify the patterns. There are four components in a time series. One is a trend, the other one cyclic component, seasonal variations, and irregular fluctuations. So you have to identify the pattern, either trend or a cyclic component, so the seasonal variation of the irregular fluctuations. So identify those patterns, you can predict the, you can forecast the future values. And this is the first one is the trend. Trend refers to upward or downward movements characterize a time series over time. So if we take, this is the time axis, right? If a line is goes to up like this way, that is approximately linear. So this is upward linear trend, and this one upward non-linear trend. This is a linear trend, and this goes to this side, that is a downward linear trend, downward linear trend, and this is downward non-linear trend. So you have to identify that first part, that first type of the component of the time series is the trend. Trend can be majorly divided into two parts, upward trend and downward trend. Under that, linear and non-linear trends are there. Then these are the examples for the trends, that population of growth, agricultural productions, export of manufactured goods, prices of consumer goods. These are some trends. And second one is the cyclic component. Cyclic refers to a recurring up and down movements around the trend levels. So you can see that here, recurring up and down movements around the trend level. And here if you take, these are the booms and these are the slumps of a cyclic component. But you have to remember, if you are taking that is a cyclic variation, so you have to observe at least 30 years, right? Otherwise we can tell that is a cyclic variation. Minimum you have to observe the data within 30 years. Cyclic variations are difficult to forecast because of the lack of historical data. We need more than 30 years of data at least to make a prediction about a cycle, right? To make a prediction, at least we need 30 years of data, otherwise it is not a good prediction. If you are taking the small time to see the cyclic pattern, it is not good, it is not a good prediction. At least we need 30 years of data. And third one is the seasonal variations. Seasonal variations are predicts patterns in time series that complete themselves within a calendar year or less than calendar year, and then are repeated on regular basis. So it means if a pattern come like this in 1 year, right, this is 1 year, and also in the second year it's come like this way, the second year, that means that is a seasonal variation, right? In the within 1 year it shows like this, the variation is like this, so that is a seasonal variation. Okay, and I will show the example later. Often seasonal variations occur yearly. Often it is occur in yearly basis, but seasonal variations can also last less than 1 year also. Doesn't matter, it may be less than 1 year. It shows, it need to be show a pattern with a specific time period. If need means if you take 6 months, after every 6 months you can see those types of pattern, it means that is a seasonal variation, otherwise that is not. A definite repeated movements of a regular periodic type occur when over short duration is known as the seasonal variation. If it is in the short period of time, it is categorized under seasonal variation. If it goes more than 30 years, it goes to the cyclic variations. The duration of movements, that is its period, depend upon the nature of the variate under consideration, and the period may be day, a week, a month, a quarter, or a year. Period can be vary, but it can be but the pattern must be shown in same period of time. It means if you get the day wise need to be this kind of pattern. This is the example that is some timber production. Then here you can see, and if you take this one, you can see the pattern is like this, no? In this year again the same pattern, right? So in every year you can see that every pattern is same, so this is cyclic variation. This is cyclic variation. If you can see, observe this more than 30 years, that goes to sorry, this is the seasonal variation, that is seasonal variation. If this goes to more than 30 years, that's come under cyclic variation. Then last one is the irregular fluctuations. Irregular fluctuations are erratic time series movements that follow no recognizable or regular pattern. Such movements represent is left over in a time series after trend, cycle, and seasonal variations have been accounted for. The irregular fluctuations cannot be predicted, shows sudden rise or fall at a certain instance of time, short duration, and non-repeating. It means if you can't identify either trend, either seasonal variation, or the cyclic behavior, it means that have irregular fluctuation. As an example, if we take that like this way, there are no specific pattern there, then this is irregular fluctuation. This as an example, if you can say that the retail sales from the shoe store, then here then time is goes like this way, then fluctuations go here and there, so we can say can't see the any pattern. So if we have the irregular fluctuations, we can predict the future, we can forecast based on those values. Okay, then again we have four types of components in the time series. First one is the trend, then uh, cyclic variation, then seasonal variation, as well as the finally irregular fluctuations. So you have to analyze these data in further. You have to write all the how it's analyzed. I will explain next part of this video. So you have to have some idea about what are those things and how to identify these patterns to make the predictions. And variance of time series, this is a constant variable. It means if you take this width always same, right? This is the time series with constant variation. It no need to take like this way. If we take like this way, then look at that, width is same, no, width is same, that is also constant variation. Okay, if it goes to that side, that is also constant variation. If it goes to this side, that is also constant variation. Doesn't matter. So we have to check only the width of this spread of points. And increase in variance, look at this, the variance is increasing, width is increasing. So if it can be like this way also, no, that is increasing, no, increasing variation, right? Increasing variation, that is increasing variation. Variance, increasing variance. So the other type is decreasing variance, so that is decreasing, right? Like this way, it can become any side. So variation is decreasing like this, that is decreasing variance. So if we consider the variance, there can be three types: constant variance and increasing variance, as well as the decreasing variance. And now I told you earlier also, then we have to know how to analyze the time series patterns. So then here I present four types of graphs, and I am going to explain how to analyze these graphs. So when you are doing the assignments and the final examinations, sometimes there may be questions to analyze the given graph according to the components of the time series. Then graph 1, what can you say, right? And here, so if we see that, no, there can be a trend or the cyclic behavior or that irregular fluctuation, no, then here that's sometimes, no, it's like a trend, no, then that is like irregular fluctuation, no, then here, so how can be this is a cyclic behavior or seasonal variation, we'll see. That is a graph 1. So if we are explaining those graphs, right, you have to write about all the components. It means if there is a trend, if it is not, you can't write, you have to write we can't see there is no trend. So or we can see a seasonal variation within that time, that here only 20 years is given, right? If there may be more than 30 years, it can be a seasonal variation. Likewise you have to predict, right? Okay, so you have to explain clearly that, then that way you can earn the marks. So here, then what is this? Monthly housing sales in millions over 75 to 95. So the monthly housing sales, how strong seasonality within year, right? This you can see that seasonal variation, no, yeah, with as well as some strong cyclic behavior within about 6 to 10 years, right? There is a cyclic behavior that is not completed because we observe only 6 to 10 years, right? There are no apparent trend in over this period. So you have to write all the components, not like then if you can see only the cyclic behavior, it is not enough to write there is a cyclic behavior. You have to write there is no trend, but it can be a there is a cyclic behavior. That is the way of analyzing those graphs. Then we will move to the second graph now. Here, that is no, that is company. There is a trend also. No, there is no seasonality. So you can't see there is no seasonal variation, but obvious downward trend. Here you can see the downward trend. Possibly if we had a much longer series, if there is a much longer series, we would see that downward trend is actually part of the long cycle, right? So you have to predict if there is a long series, it can be a long cycle, but we viewed only 100 days. Here it is given only 100 days. That is not enough, right? If we need to take the cyclic behavior, we need more than 30 years. The 100 days is given, so it is appears to be trend. So you have to write it is appeared to be a trend because only 100 years, 100 days. If you have the more data, you can tell that is a part of a cyclic behavior. So that is a way of explaining the analyzing those graphs. Then we will move to the third graph, that is Australian monthly electricity production. So it is goes like this, that it like be a trend. The Australian monthly production shows the longer increase in trend. Here that is increase in trend with strong seasonality. Here you can see the seasonality also here. Here that pattern is same, right, within same time thing. That is increase in trend as well as the seasonal variation also. There is no evidence to any cyclic behavior. There is no cyclic behavior in there. Then the fourth graph, the daily change in Dow Jones index. This can be, we can't see any pattern, no? So we have to explain one by one. The daily change in Dow Jones index has no trend, so there is no trend. Seasonality, no seasonal variation, or cyclic behavior, there we can't see anything. So there are random fluctuations. You can see the random fluctuations which do not appear to be very predictable. So it can't, by using this data we can predict, and no strong patterns, we can't observe any pattern that would help with the developing a forecasting model. So what is this? This is a irregular fluctuation. So you have to mention one by one and finally you have to write the conclusion. So if you present these type of graphs, that is definitely in your assignment 1. So you have to explain all the components like this way. Don't write there is a upward trend. That is not enough. I think you got the point. So you have to write all the things descriptively, how you reached, how you predict those things by observing the given data. Write one by one, okay? And then objectives of time series. Compact description of data, we can get general description of the past behaviors of the time series. There is a one objective, we can take the past behaviors. Interpretation of economic statistics. For this process, it is important to recognize the presence of seasonal components and to remove them so as not to confuse them with the long-term trend. This process is known as seasonal adjustments. That is the other object, that is interpretation of economic statistics, and the other one is a forecasting. So we can predict, right? That is another objective of time series. So you have to remember those objectives. And hypothesis testing, so you did those things earlier also. Then time series also we can take for the hypothesis testing. Global warming there is an example, global warming using the recorded temperature data. Then for the simulations, so you know that simulation, you learned about the simulation in IT also, to understand the underlying forces and structures that produce the observed data, to facilitate the comparison, to review the current achievements. Those are the objectives of the time series models. Then we briefly discussed about the introduction, that is introduction part of the time series analysis. So Then in the next video we are moving step by step for the purpose of the time series and why we are using the time series and applications of the time series. So I think now you have a good understanding about the what is time series and why we are using these time series and what are the objectives of the time series. So go through the note again. If you have any problem related to this lesson, you can contact me. I'll be here anytime to help you. So thank you very much. We will meet in the next video in next time.